In order to properly understand Jungian psychology and the occult, it is important for the viewers and listeners to understand context. It is important you become familiar with the man, Carl Jung, and his background to better understand his work. Today, we are going to explore what motivated Jung and what caused him to seek hidden knowledge of the world, also known as the occult. We will cover history of psychology and ancient religious traditions, including psychological aspects of Kabbalah, Daoism, and Gnosticism. By grounding ourselves in this context, the goal for today's video is to spread awareness of Jung's message in his work. Quick disclaimer for those unfamiliar, but here the occult is not equivalent to devil worship or Satanism in any form. Those groups do exist, and they are made up of evil people with bad intentions who seek to hurt the vulnerable and naive. Think for yourself and question authority. Think for yourself and question authority. Born in 1875 in Switzerland, psychiatrist and psychotherapist Carl Jung's ideas have had enormous impact on the fields of psychiatry and psychology. Jung died in 1962. His work serves as a bridge between the old world and modern psychology. Arguably, his work informed contemporary science and served as a basis for a lot of current-day models of how the mind works. Since then, modern society increasingly focuses on mental as well as physical well-being. Jung brought about the term psychic well-being. For a practical example, people talk about one's aura or vibe. There are professionals today that diagnose and treat using an approach based on shadow work to explore their client's individual unconscious. Carl Jung worked with Sigmund Freud. His early work with Freud centered on their shared interest in the unconscious mind, which Freud viewed as a reservoir of repressed desires and unresolved conflicts. Jung was 31 years old while Freud was in his 50s. Freud was later in his career than Jung at that time. Jung respected Freud and learned a lot from him, but came to find out Freud was not always correct in his theories. It was decades after they parted ways that Jung was able to articulate the professional differences in their theories and processes. Jung described Freud as a man full of knowledge, but also very set in his ways. During their collaboration in the early 1900s, Jung was influenced by Freud's psychoanalytic theories, especially the idea that the unconscious drives human behavior through hidden sexual and aggressive impulses. Jung contributed to this framework with his work on word association tests, which revealed how unconscious material could surface through verbal responses. However, while Freud emphasized repression as the primary mechanism shaping the unconscious, Jung began to diverge, later expanding the concept to include not just the repressed content, but also a broader, more creative, collective unconscious. A key split that marked the end of their partnership by 1913. Jung developed the idea of libido more broadly. He describes libido in a more comprehensive way, describing it as much more than base sexual impulse. Jung was known for describing the collective unconscious as well as archetypes. The collective unconscious is a deeper layer of the human psyche shared by all people, distinct from the personal unconscious, which holds individual experiences. The collective unconscious contains archetypes, which are universal, innate patterns or images that shape human behavior, emotions, and thought across cultures and time. For example, the wise old man archetype might appear as Merlin in Arthurian legend or Gandalf in modern fiction like Lord of the Rings, symbolizing guidance and wisdom. These archetypes emerge in dreams, myths, and art, reflecting timeless aspects of the human experience, rooted in our shared psychological inheritance. Jung explored archetypes and the occult through his fascination with mysticism, spiritualism, and esoteric traditions, which influenced his early work on the psyche. His encounters with phenomena like seances and his own visionary experiences, such as the Red Book period, reflected this interest. However, Jung shifted from these external occult frameworks toward a more structured psychological model, distinguishing between the personal unconscious, unique to an individual, containing repressed memories and experiences. We may never know exactly, but it seems Freud was kind of a freak who had personal issues with his own repression, whereas Jung took these concepts and expanded the framework from something dark and animalistic and purely instinctual, and he made it more human and understandable in a broader context. In all likelihood, Freud struggled with his sexual impulses. Jung emphasizes the importance of using therapy and shadow work as a means to explore the hidden side of sex and sexual repression and aggression. But to Jung's point, his work would not have been possible without the foundation laid by Freud. By the way, you can listen to Carl Jung talk about his relationship with Freud in Jung's own words. This is covered in Chapter 5 of his biography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. It is its own video you can find on this channel. The archetypes, the shadow is the dark side of your personality. It's often suppressed or hidden. The shadow is an archetype representing the unconscious part of the personality that contains repressed traits, instincts, and desires an individual rejects or denies, often deemed unacceptable by the conscious self or society. Jung believed confronting and integrating the shadow such as acknowledging hidden anger or selfishness, and he believed integrating the shadow was essential for personal growth and achieving wholeness, rather than projecting these qualities onto others. Shadow work, which is the process of integrating the shadow archetype in modern occult practices. Shadow work draws directly from Jung's concept of confronting the shadow, the repressed, often darker aspects of the psyche, through introspective techniques like journaling, visualization, or ritualistic confession to uncover hidden fears and desires. Practitioners might use tarot cards such as the devil or moon to symbolize shadow traits like addiction or illusion, aiming to integrate these energies into conscious awareness for personal empowerment and balance. This mirrors Jung's belief that acknowledging and assimilating the shadow, rather than suppressing it, is essential for wholeness, a process occultists often frame as a magical or transformative act. Anima and animus. These are masculine and feminine archetypes within our unconscious. The anima is an archetype representing the feminine aspect within a man's unconscious, shaping his perceptions of women and influencing his emotional and relational life. It evolves through stages, from a primitive image of the mother to a romantic ideal like a muse, and ultimately to a spiritual guide, reflecting a man's inner growth as he integrates this contrasexual element. For example, a man might project his anima onto a partner as an idealized lover, but Jung emphasized that recognizing and reconciling with it internally is key to achieving psychological balance as well as wholeness. The self as an archetype, the self with a capital S, is the unifying principle. This is the ultimate goal of individuation. In Jungian psychology, the self is the central archetype representing the totality of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious and unconscious mind, and serving as the ultimate goal of psychological integration and wholeness. Unlike the ego, which is the conscious identity, the self emerges as a unifying force that transcends opposites, like the personal and collective, or the shadow and anima/animus, often symbolized in dreams or myths as a mandala or a wise figure. You may have heard of occult practices that talk about looking towards your higher self, and this is a more formalized way of outlining that process through Jungian psychology. The process of individuation is the lifelong journey toward realizing the self, involving confrontation and integration of unconscious elements such as repressed traits or archetypes in efforts to achieve a balanced, authentic individuality. For instance, a person might integrate their shadow, hidden flaws, and anima or animus, contrasexual aspects, through a process of self-reflection, therapy, or creative expression, gradually aligning their ego with the deeper wisdom of the self. Symbolism and mythology and their relationship to esoteric practices. Jung's exploration of symbolism and mythology was deeply intertwined with his engagement with esoteric practices, as he saw these as rich sources for understanding the human psyche. Drawing from traditions like alchemy, Gnosticism, and Eastern mysticism, Jung viewed esoteric practices as symbolic languages that expressed the workings of the collective unconscious. For instance, in his studies of alchemical texts, he interpreted the transformation of base metals into gold as a metaphor for the individuation process, the psychological journey toward wholeness, rather than a literal pursuit. Similarly, he analyzed mythological motifs such as the trickster figure found in Native American tales or Loki in Norse mythology. And he saw these as embodiments of archetypes that reveal universal human struggles with chaos and order. By connecting these symbols to esoteric rituals like the mandalas he studied in Tibetan Buddhism, Jung argued that such practices were not mere superstition, but profound attempts to externalize and integrate the inner world, aligning the personal with the cosmic through symbolic expression. Jungian psychology and other esoteric traditions, Jung's background in mysticism stemmed from his early exposure to spiritualism, occult phenomena, and esoteric traditions, including the participation in seances and his fascination with figures like Swedenborg and the Gnostics. This interest deepened through his personal psychological crises, such as the visions in the Red Book, which I have not read yet, but I've ordered a copy and I plan to share some of that on this channel in the future, as well as Jung's study of mystical systems like Kabbalah, Daoism, and Indian philosophy, which he saw as expressions of the collective unconscious and pathways to self-realization. Kabbalah is a mystical tradition that explores the nature of God and creation. Carl Jung's engagement with Kabbalah, which is Jewish mystical tradition, was not a formal or systematic study, but rather an exploratory interest woven into his broader investigation of mysticism and the collective unconscious. He encountered Kabbalistic ideas primarily through secondary sources, such as the works of Christian scholars like Noor von Rosenroth, who translated the Zohar into Latin, and through his interactions with esoteric thinkers, though he never claimed expertise in Hebrew or direct textual analysis. Jung was particularly drawn to Kabbalah's symbolic framework, such as the Sephirot, 10 emanations of divine energy, which he likened to archetypal structures within the psyche, seeing parallels between their dynamic interplay and his concept of individuation as a process of balancing opposites. For instance, he compared the Kabbalistic tree of life to a mandala, a symbol of wholeness, and interpreted the concept of Ein Sof, the infinite, as akin to the boundless potential of the self. While his work with Kabbalah was less documented than his studies of alchemy or Eastern mysticism, it surfaced in writings like Ion and his seminars, where he used its imagery to illustrate universal patterns of transformation, viewing it as a historical expression of the psyche's deepest layers rather than a religious practice he adopted. Jung's engagement with Daoism began in earnest when he collaborated with Richard Wilhelm on the 1929 translation of The Secret of the Golden Flower, a Taoist alchemical text, which he saw as a profound illustration of the psyche's transformative processes aligning with his concept of individuation. He was particularly drawn to the Taoist principle of yin and yang, interpreting it as a dynamic balance of opposites, akin to his own ideas about integrating the shadow and anima/animus within the self, evident in his foreword to Wilhelm's I Ching translation, where he explored synchronicity as a meaningful connection between inner and outer events. Jung viewed Taoist meditation and its focus on inner harmony as a practical method to access the collective unconscious, appreciating how its emphasis on the natural flow of the Tao mirrored his belief in the psyche's organic drive toward wholeness. While not a Taoist himself, he integrated these concepts into his psychological framework, using them to bridge Eastern mysticism and Western science, as seen in his seminars where he discussed the text's circular symbols like the Tai Chi as mandalas of psychic unity. Carl Jung's concepts have made it even into modern-day workplaces, such as with the Myers-Briggs personality types, broadly speaking, separating people into categories of introversion and extroversion. And this helps individuals on their journeys, as well as helping groups of people get along in workplaces. On the topic of alchemy, alchemy is a symbolic representation of the process of transformation. Carl Jung's engagement with alchemy emerged from his fascination with its symbolic richness, which he encountered during his broader exploration of esoteric traditions and the unconscious. Initially introduced to alchemical texts in the 90s through works like the previously mentioned Secret of the Golden Flower, which was a Chinese alchemical treatise gifted by Richard Wilhelm, Jung saw parallels between alchemy's transformative processes and his psychological theories, particularly individuation. He extensively studied medieval and Renaissance alchemical manuscripts, such as those by Paracelsus and Gerhard Dorn, interpreting their cryptic symbols, lead into gold, the philosopher's stone, or the union of opposites, not as literal chemistry, but as metaphors for the psyche's journey toward wholeness. His personal experiences, including visions recorded in the Red Book, deepened this interest, leading him to amass a vast collection of alchemical literature and published works like Psychology and Alchemy, 1944, where Jung linked alchemical stages, Nigredo, Albedo, Rubedo, to the integration of the shadow, anima, animus, and self. For Jung, alchemy was a historical projection of the collective unconscious, with its practitioners unknowingly mapping the same inner transformation he sought to articulate in modern psychology. Other concepts that were Jungian and also involve modern occult thought beyond shadow work, the process of integrating the shadow archetype. This includes dream analysis, so understanding the language of the unconscious, as well as meditation and ritual. Jung's method of dream analysis, where dreams are seen as messages from the unconscious, revealing archetypes and personal conflicts, is widely adopted in modern occultism, with practitioners treating dreams as prophetic or symbolic guides accessed through tools like dream journals or lucid dreaming techniques. For example, a recurring dream of a serpent might be interpreted as the Kundalini, an esoteric energy, or the wise old man archetype, prompting rituals to engage with its wisdom, much as Jung encouraged amplifying dream symbols to uncover their deeper meaning. Occultists expand this by blending Jung's ideas with mystical traditions, viewing dreams as a bridge to the collective unconscious, where universal truths and spiritual insights emerge. Aligning with the work of Carl Jung's life as guidance, Jung was dedicated to helping other people achieve balance and inner peace in their minds and in their hearts. I believe Jung was a good man, and in concluding this video, covering the ground that we've covered today, Carl Jung's foundation, this video explores Carl Jung's lifelong quest to understand the unconscious mind, emphasizing his belief that exploring hidden inner depths reveals patterns and truths critical to personal growth, a process he called the work, rooted in self-awareness and aligning with truth. Defining the occult is framed as hidden esoteric knowledge encompassing practices like alchemy, astrology, and mysticism. This is distinct from mainstream science or religion, and explicitly in this context is not tied to harmful ideologies like Satanism, which this creator condemns outright. Key concepts of Carl Jung: his theories, including the collective unconscious, which is a shared psychic layer with universal archetypes like the shadow or self, as well as individuation, which is the journey to wholeness. These bridge psychology and occult traditions, drawing from Jung's early mystical experiences and later structured psychological models. Symbolism and esoteric links: Jung saw esoteric traditions such as Kabbalah, Daoism, and Alchemy as symbolic expressions of the psyche's transformation, interpreting their rituals and myths. An example, yin, yang, or the philosopher's stone, as reflections of the unconscious striving for balance. Practical applications: modern occult practices adopt Jungian ideas like shadow work, dream analysis, and meditation to access the collective unconscious, using tools like tarot or rituals to integrate archetypes, mirroring Jung's therapeutic aim of achieving inner harmony. And finally, there's a moral stance and legacy, and this creator, me, I align with Jung's mission of fostering balance and peace, rejecting any use of esoteric knowledge for harm, and I want to highlight Jung's lasting influence on psychology. This is evident in concepts like the Myers-Briggs types in the workplace, and I want to do this while urging viewers to pursue self-betterment over mindless pursuits of power or selfish pursuits of power. I don't think that's the correct way to live, and I think it hurts the person doing it in ways they don't even know, and I think it obviously hurts others around them. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this video. Goodbye for now.